Hello, and welcome to NACM's 2021 Annual Conference Video Bonus Sessions. On behalf of NACM President TJ Bement and President-elect and Conference Chair Kathy Griffin, welcome to today's session. NACM would also like to acknowledge the generous support of the State Justice Institute for their support of this and all the programs of the annual conference. We would like to thank the Conference Development Committee for creating this educational programming for 2021. My name is Jude Del Prior. I'm a former NACM president and presently assist the Association in Education Planning. With me today is Erin Carr, NACM Association Manager. Today's program is being pre-recorded as a bonus to both live and virtual conference attendees. Our presenters have provided their contact information that will be uploaded and posted with this video in the event you have any questions after viewing. Today's session, Talking to SRLs Through Tech, a case study. The National Center for State Courts has been working with the District Court in Wyandotte County, Kansas, to create an online tool that allows people to manage their traffic tickets. It sounds simple, but this one case type takes an enormous amount of court staff time as people get easily confused about which agency gave them a ticket, which courthouse they need to go to, how to pay the ticket, and what to do when they get to court. Come learn about an interactive solution that provides tailored information depending on a user's situation. Today's panel will discuss how it was built, the mistakes made along the way, and how you can learn from these lessons to do something similar in your court. Facilitating today's session is Zach Zarnow. Zach is a principal court management consultant at the National Center for State Courts, focusing on increasing access to justice. He has worked with courts and their partners at the local and national level on civil legal system modernization and process simplification. He is co-creator and co-host of Tiny Chats. He was also program director at the Illinois Equal Justice Foundation, where he led an overhaul of data collection, grant management procedures, and outcome measurements, and designed and launched the Illinois Armed Forces Legal Aid Network, which he still manages. His dog's name is Smudge, and she's as cute as she sounds. Zach, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jude, for that extremely accurate introduction. I'd like to introduce the rest of our panel first. Please, if you wouldn't mind, Thomas.
Hi, everyone. My name is Toma Officer. I'm one of the co-founders of Afterpattern. We're the platform that was used to build this app. And I had the privilege of working alongside Kim to actually build the app itself.
I'm Kristi Hill. I'm the clerk of the district court for Wyandotte County in Kansas City, Kansas. And I was part of this group to help build the boarding pass.
The district courts and the district court clerks. And I'm also the staff for our Access to Justice Committee.
Great. Thanks all. And so let's start with where we are. We mentioned this project is in Wyandotte County, Kansas. For those of you to situate this in your mind and think about it in comparison to your own court, this is near Kansas City, Missouri. There's a population of about 165,000 people. Makes up the entirety of the 29th Judicial District in Kansas with 16 divisions and 1 judge per division. And in 2019, there were about 21,000 cases filed. So that's where. Here's what. As Jude mentioned, we were thinking about ways to improve the court user experience. And we were thinking about kind of boarding passes at an airport. You usually don't get it at an airport. You actually usually get it on your phone or print it out on your computer or somehow have it in advance of arriving. And it tells you a whole lot of really useful personalized information, like where to go when you need to be there, what gate your plane is leaving from, what group you are boarding the plane in, what seat you're sitting in, what time you'll arrive, where your connections are. And we were thinking all of that is really great information. And then we're thinking about courts, and while they have websites, it's not as easy to find that. It's not as easy to know exactly what you need to know to get your goals met at the court. You might just show up and you end up talking to a clerk, or maybe there's a self-help center. You might even ask security. Maybe you call in advance. And at the National Center, we thought, let's we've worked with the folks in Kansas already. We like them. We'd seen Afterpattern's product. We liked it. And we thought, let's try and build something that's proactive, that's personalized, that gives people legal information, procedural information, logistical information that's relevant to them. It's just what they need to know to meet their needs. And so we decided to try and build it. I think we did it. And to put all that in context and in concrete nature, I'm going to turn it over to Thomas to actually show you the app, and then we'll talk about how we built it.
Great. I'm going to share my screen now. Let me know when you can see my web browser. Okay.
You can see it.
Okay. So in this context, I have unfortunately received a traffic ticket, but thankfully I have access to this app, and I have some questions about what to do next, and I'm going to use this app to figure that out. So we say app, we just mean a website. This right here is a web page that can be visited from any web browser. So I'm on my computer, but I could just as easily be on my phone. I could be on my refrigerator, which also has a web browser. So I'm going to make sure that I have the ticket in front of me, which I do. Now, who gave me the ticket? Thankfully, it's pointing me where to look on my own hard copy. I got this from the Kansas Highway Patrol. Does the ticket say municipal office building on it? Again, I get some helpful instructions about where to look on my ticket. It does not. It does say district office. Did the person who gave me this ticket write court or must appear on it? They did. I did not get this ticket for failure to show proof of insurance. And there's a different path I could be taking depending on how I answer these questions, different questions that might be asked of me depending on how I answer. What I'm doing now is just inputting the information for what we call a relatively simple ticket. Is that right? My goal is to pay this ticket, and I'm being told that based on what I've provided so far, I'm gonna have to pay this in court. If I want to tell the judge my side, that would be a different scenario, but pay the ticket is my goal. And here's my boarding pass. It's given to me as a Word document. It could also be given to me as a PDF. And we're going to take a look at it. I'm going to share my screen one more time so that I can show you the boarding pass. Let me know when you can see this Word document.
We got it.
Nice. So this is a boarding pass customized to me based on the information I provided. I didn't give it any personal information. You saw what I was just inputting, but it knows who gave me the ticket. It knows that because of one of these scenarios, either I don't have insurance, they wrote must appear, or this ticket is from municipal court. I shouldn't attempt to pay this online. Attempting will result in only a partial payment, which could result in a warrant for my arrest. They know that my goal is to pay the ticket, and I cannot pay this because until I appear in court. And now I have some helpful instructions, like a boarding pass, that Zach was talking about earlier, about what to do next. I have the address of where I should go. I have some helpful instructions about exactly where I should go in that building and what I should do to be appropriate for a courtroom, some parking, where to enter, and then some relevant information because of the pandemic. So that is one use case of the boarding pass app. There's many different versions of the boarding pass I could have, depending on how I answered it. But this is the boarding pass for me and for my situation.
I'm muted. Yeah, Jim and Kristi. That's what we built. Why don't you tell us how we built it?
Okay, sure. First, I'd like to introduce my colleague and partner in crime, Kristi. She is the chief clerk for the Wyandotte County Courts, and but for her help, this would have never, ever, ever gotten off the ground. She was my go-to girl, my rock, my source of all kinds of information and sounding board and listener of complainer when I got frustrated. So I just wanted to shout out to her. So Kristi, Tomas has shown us what this looks like. Let's go back to the very beginning. And can you talk us through how we started this whole project? It kind of flowed out of the National College had done a field study within Kansas, and they had visited your court. And so there was some familiarity with Wyandotte County and your awesome self-help centers and your investment in helping self-represented. So you guys were kind of the obvious choice, but there was more to it that went into it than just picking you. So can you talk to us about the very, very beginning?
Well, we first needed to come up with some goals. Why do we want to do this project? What would we want to get out of this project? So, we knew that we get phone calls daily on where people need to be. Front counter interaction, where we're all just, it seems like information boosts. Could we alleviate some of this by having this boarding pass? So those were our goals: cutting down front counter, in person, and of course, phone calls.
And so how did you figure out even that you had a lot of phone calls? Because as the chief, you're very busy.
Yes. Well, I had to go to my staff. The frontline staff was so beneficial to this, the startup of this project. Going to them, asking them in the beginning, what are your frequently asked questions? What do you get daily? What do you guys encounter on a daily basis that I necessarily don't? I'm not the front line. So, you have to do that with your frontline staff. So I compiled all of those. And then we came up with a group of different high traffic cases, or, the most pro se involved cases.
And what was that group?
Well, we narrowed it down to 3. We did looked at domestic, traffic, and small claims and eviction cases. Our domestic cases we have over 2,500 cases that are filed in 2019. Traffic had almost 8,000 cases filed. The small claims and evictions were at 6,000. So, we looked at each of those different categories, worked through each area, and how many steps, it would take to get to the finished result. We went through first, domestic had a lot of branches. It wasn't as easy to get to a finished, point as say traffic was, which, someone gets a ticket, they need to pay it. There's not that many steps in between as opposed to domestic. So we ended up choosing traffic for our first boarding pass.
And what other considerations did you have when you decided on traffic?
Well, because it does have the highest volume of case, the case number, that definitely was a factor. The more people, more cases, more people need this boarding pass. But it also had a very narrow subject area. A lot of traffic cases are also pro se litigants. Most of them do not have attorneys on infractions, traffic infractions. So that was a big, one of our biggest decisions for that. We also chose traffic because it is the biggest group of people that are actually in the courthouse for the first time. For example, when I was 17, that was the first time I was ever in a courthouse. So it definitely is, I think, a website or an app that someone will be able to use to help them maneuver the courthouse. We also have a situation that's kind of unique, I think, to our county. We do have our address here, and just for our courthouse is 710 North 7th Street. Across the street is City Hall, which offices our municipal court office. They're at 701 North 7th Street. So our addresses are very similar. There are also 2 law enforcement agencies that issue tickets in both courts. We have the Wyandotte County Sheriff and the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. So yes, it is very confusing, I think, for people. But that's why the phone calls, that's where the in-person comes in. No one knows really where to go because of that unique situation that we have in our county.
And so we were also looking at trying to expedite the flow of your traffic dockets, weren't we?
Yes, we were. There was a lot of bogged down, people not knowing where to be, wasting the time of, our largest docket we have, in district court. So if people knew where to go, knew that they were actually supposed to be across the street versus here in our court, that doesn't waste the time of the people who are there because they know they're, or the judge's time or this court staff.
So you talked about that there are two agencies that issue tickets for both.
Correct.
In your county, how many total agencies are there that can actually write a ticket?
We have 6, but the 4 that mostly, the 4 left of this group are the Kansas Highway Patrol, Wyandotte County Wildlife and Parks, ABC and Union Pacific Railroad, and the University of Kansas Police Department.
And so when Tomas was showing us the boarding pass itself, there was an image of a ticket. Can you tell us how that came about?
Yes. During this process of looking at the 6 agencies, we knew that we needed to have some samples, and not just samples that you pull from your case management system. We wanted some clean, pretty samples. So gathering those was a difficult task, but a fun one, because there's just so many different varieties, but it was definitely something that was worth getting, because I think people need to see that visual when they're on the boarding pass, that, hey, this is what I got. Yes, that matches. Great. So here we are. I have the right ticket. I have the right information. The boarding pass is going to tell me where I need to be.
And so you've already told us that there are 2 separate courts involved, and each court has different tickets that can go to one place or another based upon the agency and what is actually written on the ticket. Is that right?
That is correct.
Go ahead.
Project, we're district court. We were like, okay, we're doing our stuff. But then as we were doing this project, we realized that we just can't kick somebody out of our boarding pass if they're municipal court. Let's try to gather some information. Let's not just say, oh, can't help you. So we did gather physical instructions for both courts, where they needed to go, what do they, where court is, what they need to wear, where they need to park. So it was very important to us to have both sides, just so we're there to help people, not just say, sorry, you're on your own. So that was a big, where they pay online. We gathered that. I was in close contact with not only my front line, but also municipal court staff as well.
So I want to talk to you about the payment process. Tomas, if you could fire up a pay online.
Yeah. So this is a traffic ticket where the driver requests to pay online, and they can based on their
Tomas, we're seeing the boarding pass.
Yeah, and so
thank you.
In the boarding pass is a link that points you to here.
And so what you're looking at is our actual online payment process that the person goes into. And one of the things that they have to do is agree that they're going to pay guilty or no contest in order to make the payment. And there's waivers of rights. And so we wanted to replicate that on the boarding pass itself. Tomas, can you pull up the actual question and answer part?
Yeah. So
Kristi, you want to talk us through how all of this came about?
Well, if you're paying, I'm sorry, Kim, are you asking me to, like, if they need to pay online?
Yes.
Okay. So, we needed to gather this information. If you're paying online, if you're paying in person, if you are doing this and you get to where you need to actually come to court, the boarding pass will tell you that you need to be in court.
And if they choose online, that we had options in Wyandotte County.
Correct.
Kristi, you want to talk about the minimum payments?
Yes, there is a minimum payment. So it does give us an option in the boarding pass, or gives the person an option to pay a little bit of money at a time with a $20 minimum. So it tells them that that is an option to do.
And so thank you, Tomas. So then the last thing you mentioned was if they have to come to court. Are there certain cases by law that people have to have a court appearance?
Yes. So let's just say a person has no insurance. Then on their payment line, it is actually going to say court, which tells them, the boarding pass is going to tell them that they cannot just pay online. They can't pay a little bit online. They can't do anything online. They need to appear in court. So the boarding pass is going to let them know that depending on how they chose, the questions, the answers they chose.
So after you gathered all of this information, what then did you have to do?
Well, once all this was gathered, we obviously had to go through all the possibilities. Like Tomas, he did his, that one scenario. Well, there are numerous scenarios that a person is, that are going to be coming across that boarding pass. This person has this, it's 701, 710. All of those are questions that they'll ask that we needed to have those ready to go for this program to work. So we needed to detail, each scenario for each, different kind of infraction or whatever they have. So yeah, it was quite a process.
So you put together basically the flow of all of these different scenarios.
Correct. Just like with the insurance, just depending on how they answer the questions, the boarding pass just let them know how to get this ticket resolved.
When I look at the demo and when I hear you two talk about it, the demo is so clean and smooth. And then I pull back the curtain and listen to you two talk, and you're mapping different processes. You've got multiple courthouses. You've got 6 different ticketing agencies. You've got payment plans. You've got mandatory court appearances for failure to have insurance or multiple infractions. I mean, from a user perspective, what you saw when you saw the boarding pass in the app and the end document, beautiful. But when you look behind it, it is scary. And so you guys did a whole lot of work mapping all that out. And I think that probably kind of the heart of all this is really that final product. And Kim, you spent a lot of time working on this. And what's interesting to me about this, and not something I knew before I started working with you all on this, is how variables work and how you can really think about this document that moves and changes and reflects all that complexity while displaying a very simple interface. So Kim, question for you. Talk us through it. How did you go about writing that final document, knowing that there was so many possibilities involved in it?
Well, Zach, you and I both learned what a variable was during this process. And I have to tip my hat to Tomas because he was just super throughout this whole process. And full disclosure, when we went home for the pandemic, I didn't even really know what Zoom was. I am not a tech person. And so he and I worked really well together, which I think is kind of important to note. We had a very small team, and I think that really benefited us to be able to move quickly and make decisions and resolve things. And so once Tomas kind of explained his language to me so that we could kind of talk tech together, what we have to do is take each piece of data that is on the flow that Kristi was talking about and assign it a variable. And that variable would get a number and a kind of catchphrase that then I would communicate to Thomas. If this variable is true, this is a scenario that this goes to. And so that's how we created the pass. I wish that we had started, instead of having a bunch of different sheets with a bunch of different scenarios, I wish we had started with one long, this is everything, because a lot of the variables kind of crossed over. You can have multiple variables on multiple passes. You can also have one variable, like, for example, the University of Kansas Police Department. The only thing they can do is write a ticket for municipal court, and you have to go to court. So that's a really simple thing. Mm-hmm. So after we put together the spreadsheet, then Tomas kind of took off with it and started actually creating the questions that would match the variable that's an answer. It's kind of like a reverse Jeopardy situation.
Well, should we look at one, or look at an example rather, so that people understand what variables mean and maybe put a little more context around this?
Yeah, I can show that. It's easily the most difficult concept to wrap your head around, but once you do, I think, like you were just saying, in hindsight, it changes how you would approach the entire project. So this idea of variables too is consistent across any tool you use. Afterpattern is just one of many different tools you can use to build what's called a guided interview that assembles documents, or an expert system, what we call legal apps. So what I'm showing you here, there's nothing about this that I'm going to show you that's unique to Afterpattern. This is just the nature of building a document automation tool. So this is a boarding pass. Obviously, it's a finished version, and it's where I recommend people start. Start with the document you want to produce. Literally write it out. It can be easy if that document already exists. It can be surprisingly difficult if it doesn't. So you have to create this thing. You know, what does it look like if the app existed? And then you go through and you try to pick all the pieces of text that would change. That's the whole point of a document automation app. It's not going to produce the same document over and over. My boarding pass is different than yours. And so this process is just a matter of really just highlighting text. I'm just highlighting some examples here. The actual boarding pass had many, but here's 3 examples. Kansas Highway Patrol is not always going to be who gives you the ticket. Your goal will not always be to pay it back a little bit of money at a time, and the address you're instructed to go to will change. So you're just going through and saying, all right, these things will change. And we can't refer to these as this thing and that thing. So we have to give them labels at some point. This is what Kim was saying, a catchphrase or a number, so this is notoriously difficult in software development. You know, perhaps this one appears a bit easy. We'll call it, oh, this is what did we end up calling this one actually?
Issuing agency.
Issuing agency, not so bad. But this one right here, we ended up calling driver goal. I think this is just court address, another easy one. But you can imagine, like, once you start getting a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen variables, you start running out of names, or your own naming convention starts losing any kind of consistency, and you start feeling like you're going insane. So we label these things, and then we have to acknowledge that, okay, well, they're going to have different values. This particular one I'm highlighting is one driver goal, to pay back the ticket a little bit of money at a time online. But there's many different goals. You can pay back the full amount online. You can pay back the full amount in court, pay back a little bit at a time in court. You can appear before the judge to tell your side of it. So this variable, which we call driver goal, will have many different values that I've listed out here. And then it's a process of thinking about, well, why would one value be picked over another? In this case, we're asking the end user, we're asking the driver, what's your goal? So that's it in a nutshell. You figure out what changes on your document, you give it some labels so you can have like a consistent language when you talk about it. And then you figure out why a variable would have a particular value and what kind of question you would need to ask someone to elicit that. You don't always have to ask someone a question to give a variable a value. A good example I like to use is it's relevant for many different legal aids to know where someone falls in the federal poverty guidelines. And perhaps that'll be a variable, like where you fall, 120%, 2%, 50%. But you don't need to ask someone that, because they often don't know. Where do you fall in the federal poverty guidelines? The answer will be, I have no idea. But they know how big their household is, and they know what their household income is. And so with that information, you can define this variable. So a lot of different ways to do that, but that in a nutshell is the process. Here's an example. Here's what the traffic ticket boarding pass looks like when it's finished. So it's just a template document. The text we're seeing is the hard-coded text. It's the text that'll appear on every boarding pass. So every boarding pass has this header, and these little yellow pills here are all the variables. So you can see that the boarding pass is mostly variables. This template is smart enough to produce many different boarding passes because of its variables. And that's the magic.
It is kind of like magic. It's also kind of scary to court sometimes when you start talking about technology, because then they start thinking about data and security. So maybe first to you, Tomas, what does this app collect? What data does it save? And what considerations just generally should courts keep in mind around security and privacy with something like this?
Yeah, very good question. So right now, this app isn't connected to a database. So although it collects information about your goal, who gave you the ticket, it doesn't save it anywhere. So it uses that information to generate a ticket, but once you close out of that session, once you exit out of the browser window, it's gone. There's no one for you to call to ask, oh, what did I input? I just was on your website. There's no one that could answer that question. So that's very much by design. So what that means is we can now choose what data we want to save, if we want to save any. And there's the obvious data to save, like what someone's putting into the app. And then there's the less obvious data to save, such as the fact that someone used the app in the first place. That itself is a piece of data. And oftentimes that's what most people want to collect if they're in this space. They don't want any personal information. This app doesn't collect any, by the way. It never asks for your name or your address. But it is helpful to know at the end of the month, it's helpful to be able to answer the question, well, how many people use this app? Or how many people started it and how many people dropped off? Of those who dropped off, where did they drop off? And maybe with that information, we can try to figure out, well, how do we improve the experience of the app? So the short answer is it's all in your control. If you do choose to save data, then it's a question about, well, how safe is it that, where's that data being stored? This is different on what service provider you use. Afterpattern uses Amazon Web Services, where we are GDPR compliant. But it depends on who you're using. Sometimes data can be saved in a server that's literally in the court building somewhere. A lot of options.
Right. So Kim, with that menu of options, you're obviously still thinking this through, but what are some of the data usages you envision in the future to improve the app or figure out how it's working?
Well, just to kind of reiterate what Thomas said, based upon what this app is to do, if somebody decides that they don't want to pay a ticket online, they can just either back button or they can completely start over and create a brand new boarding pass that suits whatever their new situation is. And it was really important to us to have it as a start over as opposed to a saved. I think it improves user confidence that we're not somehow spying on them. And so that was a really positive distinguishing factor. And the analytics we're going to start with are what Tomas outlined, which is how many people started it, if they dropped off, where did they drop off, if we have some language question issues that people aren't understanding or they're getting frustrated, so that we can go back and relook at the language. And then I think Kristi is going to talk about how she's going to have her people kind of figure out if this is actually a benefit.
How are you going to do that, Kristi? What kind of things are you looking for?
Well, I mean, we'll just go, I'll go to them and ask them, has this, helped? Hopefully it has. Each office is different, but I think with the information that we can get from those, the analytics of that definitely is going to be helpful to, whether or not this works.
So talking to frontline staff, seeing if your calls have declined, getting a sense from judges whether people are showing up prepared.
Correct.
Got it. And so,
and
yeah, please.
The relationship that Kristi has built with this project with municipal court, we think we're going to be able to get feedback from all users across all platforms and probably also even law enforcement. That is our expectation.
Yeah, Kristi, I really loved it when you said that. We don't just stop at our doors. Like, these people are still trying to solve a problem, right? So even though the municipal court is in our court, we're still going to talk to them. And I think that's a really important tip and lesson that you've learned.
Yes.
I'm curious for all of you, and this is probably the last question. Other courts might be considering this. What else have you learned along the way? Things you would have done differently, things you think went really well, recipe for success.
Well, I think Kim had talked about it earlier about, starting with a small team. Me and her have worked very hard on this. And kudos to you, Kim, with working with Tomas on the variable part. I wasn't so much involved in that as much as gathering all the information for Kim and Tomas. But kudos to you guys for actually doing that part, because it was very difficult for me to grasp. But yeah, no, I mean, starting with a small team, we're able to communicate. If you have too many, let's just say cookies or hands in the cookie jar, sometimes things get lost. With our small team that we had, we were able to get this accomplished and start on a new one. It definitely would help and benefit just having a small team work on this project.
The number one thing that I learned is to start with your absolute largest scope finished product. So whatever it's going to look like, and to really take time with that document to make sure that you have all of the different branches that will potentially arise, because we had to do a lot of, well, not a lot, but we had to do quite a bit of additions after we had kind of already started. And at one point we kind of went back to the drawing board and kind of started over. The number one thing though is having Tomas. He was fantastic. He was fun to work with, and it just really knows his stuff and was incredibly kind and encouraging. And it was really, really a pleasant experience. So I would encourage everybody to try and figure out something like this, because I think it is going to be a benefit, and to utilize Afterpattern.
And I'd like to add one more thing to that, to make sure that you consider is go to your staff, use your staff. They're there. They're the ones that, are going to deal with this daily. The questions they have, the phone calls, the front counter issues that come up. Use your staff. They're there. They know what they're doing. They can give you all the best data that you need to get this project going.
Any other last thoughts before we close?
I'm good.
Well, I've certainly learned a lot from all of you, and I think I've enjoyed working with you all as well. I'm really excited about this. I know there's early conversations about rolling it out to some other courts in Kansas, and I think that at the very least, as a proof of concept, there's now an understanding of the power of a tool like this. And so I encourage other courts to consider it. If you'd like to talk about it, myself and the rest of the National Center are ready to assist. Jude and the rest of NACM, thank you very much for having us. And we hope you all enjoyed what is undoubtedly your favorite bonus session.
Thank you. Kristi, Kim, Tomas, and Zach, thank you for an excellent program. NACM sends their thanks. And for those of you viewing this program, we'd like to thank you as well. Remember, if you have any questions or desire additional information, you may contact the presenters directly. All right, it's a wrap.